Back in June, we saw the release of Star Wars The Rebellion Omnibus Volume 2. Both Volumes 1 and 2 follow after the events of A New Hope, when the Rebellion was just starting out, and Luke, Han, and Leia had only just begun their adventures fighting the Empire. It may not come as a big shock to say that Volume 2 directly ties into Volume 1, so I would absolutely recommend that you read this one first. It introduces characters and story arcs that will also be in Volume 2. If you want to buy the first volume, as well as this one, I'll leave links in the description if you want to check them out. I also have a review of the Rebellion Volume 1 on this channel. I'll include a link to that in the description as well. But getting back to this one, apart from a few side stories, it mostly collects the Empire and Rebellion comic series from the mid-2000s. According to the back cover, months after the destruction of the Death Star, the shockwaves are still being felt across a volatile galaxy, while the Rebel Alliance continues to build on its victory. Darth Vader and the Imperial forces look to reassert order and strike a devastating blow of their own. But first things first, let's look at the cover. This gorgeous piece is the front cover art from the comic adaptation of Splinter of the Mind's Eye by Hugh Fleming. If the movie version of Splinter of the Mind's Eye was made instead of Empire Strikes Back, then this would be the perfect movie poster. As always, the back cover features the covers of all the stories that we see within, and if we take off the dust jacket, we see Lieutenant Janek Sunber leading a massive Imperial assault against the Rebel Alliance in a panoramic shot. It's pretty epic, and it really makes me want to read this book and find out what happens. Opening it up to the table of contents, we can see that there are a lot of bigger story arcs interspersed with smaller one-shot stories. Starting off, we have River of Chaos, a few one-shots from Star Wars Empire, the In the Shadows of Their Fathers arc, then followed up by the Wrong Side of the War arc. Then we're moving on from Empire comics to the Rebellion comics with the My Brother, My Enemy arc, then the Ahakasta Gambit arc, Small Victories, Vector, a few stories from Star Wars Tales, then finally the Splinter of the Mind's Eye adaptation to cap it off. Since there are so many stories, I'll only give a brief summary of each one. Minor spoiler warning ahead, as some of these stories lead into the next. Starting with River of Chaos, it's a strange one. It mostly focuses on side characters not seen in the movies, on this planet Mahali, and the species called the Hadrachi that can see into the time stream. The rebels in the Empire have been going at it on this planet, and Imperial pilot Ranulph Tromer is ordered to infiltrate and see if the Hadrachi are going to join the rebellion. There are twists, turns, and betrayals, but ultimately doesn't really connect to anything else in the EU. I think the zany time stream stuff was my big takeaway from this story. Next is Empire Issue 28 Wreckage. An Imperial dude who is drawn to look way too much like Moff Tarkin hires Boba Fett to retrieve a precious item aboard a derelict Star Destroyer before it's set to be destroyed. But Boba Fett is a complete badass, so he easily gets it done. In Empire Issue 31, The Price of Power, Vader shakes down some Velociraptor-looking aliens to get lower prices for their blaster cartridges. It's a fairly short story that only ties into the next arc near the end. But hey, dinosaurs in Star Wars. What more could you want? And next we have In the Shadows of Their Fathers. The rebels try to ally themselves with the Jabeam, but the Jabeami are still triggered by when Anakin turned his back on them 20 years ago during the Clone Wars, and are now taking it out on Luke because he is Anakin's son. And to make matters worse, the Empire show up, of course, to ruin everyone's day. This story arc acts as a sequel to the Battle of the Jabeam story arc from the Republic comics. More connections between the prequels and the original trilogy era. It is up to Luke to try and not make the same mistakes that his father did. In Empire Issue 35, Model Officer, Commander Dennings and the crew of the Star Destroyer Reprisal keep killing members of the Rebel Alliance before Vader can question them, much to his annoyance. But they were both secretly working together to oust the Reprisal's gunner, who was sympathetic to the rebellion and trying to keep their location of the Rebel fleet a secret by ensuring that there are no survivors. The next arc, The Wrong Side of the War, reintroduces us to Janek Sunber, who you may remember from the first Rebellion Omnibus. and the To the Last Man story arc. Some rebels have infiltrated Callist Base, in disguise as Imperial officers. They are here to rescue the engineer Joran Sol, who is being tortured for information on the rebel fleet and Luke Skywalker's whereabouts. Then things get real awkward when Luke and his old friend from Tatooine, Janek Sunber, meet up. Their conversation is my favorite part of this arc, because Janek clearly has misgivings about the Empire, and Luke really wants him to join the Alliance. What will he ultimately choose? Then we move from the Empire comic series to Rebellion with Issue 0, Crossroads. Tal Hez, the Jabimi loyalist who gave up Joran Sol to placate the Empire, faces a crisis of conscience and embarks on his own quest to help rescue Joran Sol to right his wrongs. In the next arc, My Brother, My Enemy, Luke goes against Leia's orders to try and rescue his friend Janek Sunber. While the rift between Luke and Leia grow, can Janek as a former Imperial actually be trusted? In the Ahakista Gambit, Will Tarson, an undercover rebel spy, is found out by the dangerous crime lord Reyes. Reyes puts a bomb and a comlink in Will's head so that Reyes can puppeteer him to do what he wants, or else risk being blown up. Will Tarson now has to put together a team to crack into a vault and steal information from an Imperial database. Again, this story features mostly side characters from the comics, so I wasn't quite as invested as I usually am, but it's not like Luke and Leia need any more Rebellion-era stories. Speaking of which, in the Small Victories arc, the rebels happen upon the very important Imperial refueling station, Banastar. They sneak aboard the station on a covert mission to take it down. Meanwhile, Dina Shan feels that she isn't cut out to be a rebel and considers leaving the Alliance. It's probably my favorite arc in this omnibus. It's just a classic infiltration and sabotage mission, and I think the Alliance Special Forces uniforms are highly underrated. So next we have a continuation of the Vector story arc. And interestingly enough, since Vector is a little confusing, there is an intro page that gives a recap of the previous Vector issues to catch you up to speed. It also says to buy the Old Republic and Empire omnibuses if you want to read those issues. Vader tricks the rebels into landing on a moon which has been taken over by Celeste Morn, an ancient Jedi being influenced and somewhat controlled by the spirit of a Sith Lord. Also, Han Solo is back in the story. For some reason, I feel like I haven't seen him in this whole omnibus. Anyway, the Vector arc will be concluded in Star Wars Legacy, so it'll probably be included in that omnibus whenever that comes out. In Overkill, Boba Fett is hired by an Imperial to supposedly keep some locals in line that are defying the Empire. But perhaps hiring Boba Fett is a little, well, overkill. In the story Salvage, Boba Fett gets a distress signal from a derelict ship and investigates. It quickly turns into a horror story when he finds out that the ship is taken over by parasitic worms that bore into your flesh. Now that is gruesome. And next we're moving on to Star Wars Tales. In Lady Luck, we get to see how Lando becomes the Baron Administrator of Cloud City in a game of Sabacc. It's not required to enjoy The Empire Strikes Back, but all good EU fans like to know the backstories of characters from the movies and how they got to where they are. In Walking the Path That's Given, Vader recruits smuggler and former Separatist war hero Nas Gent to lead his own squadron under commander of Milivek. How will this squadron be formed? I do not know, as this story ends on an unresolved cliffhanger. If more Star Wars Legends stories ever get made, this story should definitely get a follow-up. In Lucky Stars, Leia joins a team of sexy femme fatales on an undercover mission to retrieve a stolen holocube containing information on rebel bases from a thief before he sells it to the Empire. In Planet of the Dead, Han and Chewie land on a planet and are attacked by an army of zombies. But maybe the best way to beat an army of zombies is by helping them. Apparently. And finally, the comic version of Splinter of the Mind's Eye. After crash landing on the planet Membon, Luke and Leia find themselves on a journey to retrieve the powerful Kyber crystal before the Empire can get their hands on it. All in all, a mostly faithful adaptation of the novel, and I would sure like it if more novels got comic adaptations like this. And then after that we get alternate covers, concept art, sketches, and that's about it. There's been a trend with these omnibuses to either be about 1,300 pages or 1,000 pages. And unfortunately for this one, it's about 1,000 pages. Its listing price is $125, but I do not recommend paying that. On Amazon right now, it's about $70, which is a lot more fair. In my Rebellion Volume 1 review, I discuss content that they could have included in either Volume 1 or Volume 2 that got left out. But I do believe that we're getting a Rebellion Omnibus Volume 3 in the future. Remember, the post-Episode 4 era is really crowded. But anyway, like I said earlier, if you're interested in this omnibus, I still recommend getting Volume 1 first. And links to both will be in the description if you're interested in checking them out.